Hey, happy Monday, you guys. I gotta tell you that I love seeing new patients and I love reading over intakes and looking at the birth process as a whole, because we've known for a really long time, at least as pediatric chiropractors, that birth and birth intervention has been some of the most overlooked health epidemic, if you will, today. And many people just kind of breeze over the birth, like, oh yeah, it was fine, or it was just a C-section, or it was just, we had these little forceps, but he's fine afterwards. And what we don't take into consideration is the fact that this baby has never touched gravity ever before. And the textbooks have said, you can literally read it in the obstetrician textbooks, that there's over 60 pounds of axial pressure being put on a baby's neck during the birth process, during a normal vaginal birth. It can be up to 90 during a cesarean section when they're having to tug and pull on a baby's head and neck. And I just, for actual picture's sake, I'm just going to show you a picture. This is actually a picture. The baby isn't my son, but the one in the bed is my son, because he went through this. And I call it a life-saving event because it really was. He would have died if we didn't have a cesarean section. But often we're not taking into consideration what happens during the birth process. Now look at that poor little baby's face, head, neck, jaw, where the fingers are. We would never in a million years, after a baby's born, handle a baby this way. I mean, we're always like, oh, watch the baby's head and neck, watch the baby's head and neck, just don't cradle it. But yet they're being pulled out by the head or neck, they're being pushed down, they're being tugged with forceps or a vacuum, or the nurse being pushing on the top of the uterus to get the baby down. We don't consider that these babies are not made of Play-Doh. This is not an easy process for them. This is extremely stressful. And if there's sometimes effects right away, we're like, my baby just never stopped crying, they never wanted to nurse, never wanted to latch. Could you imagine wanting to nurse or latch if you came out of the womb this way? You're laying peacefully in your mother's womb. This is my dramatic effect with my little guy. But then you're pulled out by your head and neck and thrown typically onto a metal pan, rubbed off and sucked out before you even get to see your mom, and you're held and you're loved and you're calmed and you're cuddled. This can be extremely traumatic on an infant. Now, I've got to tell you, in the intakes that we read over and over and over again, there is some intervention during the birth, whether it's Pitocin or an epidural to the point of mom couldn't feel the pressure, the pushing, and someone else had to push the baby out, to forceps, vacuum, or cesarean. Like I said, these can all be life-saving procedures, but we've got to look at the effects of it. I know after the C-section I had with my son Bridger, I was given an entire post-operative protocol of what I was supposed to do, but no one told me. I was a pediatric chiropractor, so I knew. No one told me what to do with my son. No one told me, you might want to have him looked at. He was just pulled out by his head and neck, and he couldn't turn his head or neck. He couldn't latch. But some moms are just called a lactation consultant. Maybe you need to change your diet. Maybe you need to hold them a different way. Maybe they have a lip or a tongue tie, and we find all sorts of reasons instead of an injury during the birth process. And then pretty soon, not only do they become colicky babies that can't eat enough food, maybe they need formula, maybe mom's really stressed about this whole process because everyone puts it on her shoulders of maybe you should check your diet, eliminate dairy and gluten and every other sugar, coffee, instead of looking at maybe that child was so jammed and injured, that upper cervical injury during the birth process, that they can't turn their head and nurse or latch, or the organs and glands that are being controlled at that area, the vagus nerve that controls the gut, can't actually digest the food, and that's why they have a colicky baby, or one that might be projectile vomiting or spitting up all the time, or not being able to poop because it runs the whole entire gut. Then we get into school age, and it's progressed to the point of this child can't focus. Well, guess what? Focusing in a brain is one of the least, absolutely not a priority for somebody who's trying to survive, who sustained an upper cervical birth injury that never went back to the way it was supposed to be made, right back to the way that God had designed this little infant. It wasn't there. They're seeing life as a subpar. They're not able to reach their potential because of this absolute choking off or strain to the upper cervical spine, and now we're trying to manage symptoms instead of let a body do what it was designed to do, get back into the environment that it was designed to self-heal and self-regulate. if you've got a child that's been through this birth process and you haven't seen a pediatric chiropractor before, I encourage you to be able to do that. Do your research, find one. The nwf.org has a list of pediatric chiropractors that can help you with things like this. We have an entire course tomorrow night called The Perfect Storm. We're talking about focus. We're talking about the brain. We are going to cover birth in the lecture. I don't even want to call it a lecture because it's actually just a bunch of amazing information put together in a beautiful little package through a lens that you may not have seen this information before. And it's all about getting your child well. It's not about managing symptoms and the next new trick for your kid to try to learn. It's about getting a child well and helping them reach the potential, putting them back into the environment that they were made and designed for, to self-heal, self-regulate, to feel awesome, like every kid should. And I encourage you to look into helping your kid find out if there was a birth injury, even if it was a vaginal birth, because there's a lot of pressure, and we've known since the 80s that there is birth injury. They did a research study on natural vaginal births and found 80% of the kids had some sort of neurological insult at birth, and now in 2015 they found that 99% of them had some level of neurological interference of birth subluxation. So I encourage you to look into it and help your kid reach their potential.